Welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at how to destroy objects, specifically destructible meshes. Now, you might have noticed when we were selecting different modes that there's a fracture mode. Now, we can go into fracture mode and we have all of these different tools for fracturing meshes. If we'd like to fracture a mesh, we first need to choose a static mesh to fracture. Now, because we added this medieval dungeon pack, we have some things like pots and vases. So I'm going to go into Medieval Dungeon, open the Meshes folder, and we have this Props folder that contains lots of little props, such as these pots here, and I think these would be perfect for breaking. Now here's this SM Pot A complete. I'm simply going to click and drag it right on into the world. Now by default it's a little bit small, and I'd like to swing a sword at this pot and break it, so it's going to need to be a little bit bigger so it's in our reach. So I'm going to scale it up by about a factor of 5 in all 3 dimensions, and that will make it nice and large. It may actually be a little bit too large. Let's press play and see how big it is. Yeah, it's a bit bigger than the character. Let's put it at about 2.5 in X, Y, and Z and see if we can grab a weapon and swing a sword. That might actually be just too short. We'll go 3.5. So 3.5 in each dimension puts it right about at the correct height. Yeah, that should work. So my goal is to swing a sword at this and break it. So first we need to actually fracture the mesh. Now here in fracture mode, I can have my static mesh selected here, and we're going to create a new geometry collection. That's what we'll get when we press the new icon here. But I'm first going to make a folder to keep all of our geometry collections for items that we wish to fracture. So opening my content drawer, in the content folder, I'm going to make a new folder, and I'll simply call this Destructibles, with an S there. And that's where I'm going to keep my geometry collections. Now, a geometry collection is basically a set of static meshes that we get after we fracture a mesh. Now, if I press New, it's going to ask me where I'd like my new geometry collection. I'm going to select the Destructibles folder, and it's going to name this SM Pot A Complete Geometry Collection. I'll go ahead and keep that name and click Create Geometry Collection. Now, as soon as I do, you see that the material changes, and we now have the ability to fracture this mesh. So down here in the fracture section to the left, we have different methods of fracturing, and these use different algorithms for randomly breaking this mesh up into little pieces. We have uniform, and if we click on that, we see this little outline with a bunch of little lines showing us where this mesh will be fractured. And if we click on cluster, we see that it uses a bit of a different algorithm. The radial type is going to fracture this from a central point. We can see that it starts here in the center, and it'll break the mesh outward in all directions. Now, we do have a gizmo here that we can change. If we rotate it by 90 degrees, for example, then we'll see that we'll fracture the mesh from this point here, and the cracks will spiderweb out. I'm going to rotate that back up to the top, and I'm going to choose uniform. I'd like to break this uniformly, and all we need to do to fracture it is click the fracture icon. Now, before we do that, we have the fracture tab with a few parameters. The most important here are min Voronoi sites and max Voronoi sites. Now, Voronoi is the name of the fracturing algorithm, and if we change the number of sites, then we'll get more pieces. And min and max means that, well, we get a random number of pieces between the min and max. I'm going to leave those at 20 and click fracture. Now, as soon as I do that, several things happen. The first is that we can see, based on the changes in the material on our pot here, that we have 20 different pieces, and each one is separated by lines. You can see that each of these represents one of those Voronoi sites. And the second thing that we see here is here in the outliner, we have under SM Pot A Complete Geometry Collection, there's a Geometry Collection component. So our static mesh actor is now replaced by an actor that has a Geometry Collection component. And in that Geometry Collection component, we have all of these different pieces, and it's numbering them from 1 to 20. Now, the interesting thing about fracturing meshes is that we can actually take this mesh with the 0 here selected and click fracture again. And what that's going to do is fracture this into subpieces. So under 1, we see that there's pieces 21 through 24. So there are different levels of fracturing, and we can continue fracturing this. And once the pot breaks, it'll break into those initial pieces and possibly break those pieces into their subpieces depending on the amount of damage taken. These destructible meshes are based on an internal system of damage, and that damage gets caused based on a number of factors. For example, if a certain force is imparted on this mesh, then if it's past a certain damage threshold, the mesh will fracture. Now we can go back to our regular select mode through the dropdown or with Shift 1, and we can see the mesh. And in the details panel for this destructible, notice that Simulate Physics is checked. And if we have gravity enabled, which we do here, then we could raise this up in the air, and as soon as we press play, we'll see it hit the ground and shatter. Now, it does still have the checkered pattern for its material. So if we'd like to see the original material for the mesh, we can select it and search for bone, and we have show bone colors. If we uncheck that, the pot now looks normal, and if we press play, we see that pot break. And it looks pretty great. So now that we have a geometry collection, we can use this. We can simply have multiple instances of this object in our world. I can duplicate it, for example, and they'll both break when they fall. And we can also use this geometry collection as a component in an actor. So now we have a geometry collection for this pot, and we'd like to be able to break it when we swing our sword and hit it. If I select it and hit the End key on my keyboard, that's going to snap it down to the floor. But if I press play and grab a sword, well, nothing really happens when I hit it. We'd like to be able to impart some forces on this so that once we swing our sword, we can crack it open and perhaps spawn some goodies from the inside of it. And that'll give us some incentive to run around and break everything we see, which is always fun. All right, great job. We now have destructibles. We're now going to go about trying to break this based on gameplay logic. I'll see you soon.